The transit pod hummed through the dark tunnels of Neo Angeles, carrying its usual mix of tired workers home from another long day. The year was 2087, and the city stretched high into the clouds above and deep into the earth below. Inside the pod, humans sat next to aliens with blue skin and 3 eyes, while androids stood perfectly still in the corners, their metal faces showing no emotion. Jake Morrison slumped in his seat, still wearing his dirty factory uniform. Grease stained his hands and his back ached from 12 hours of heavy lifting. At 32 years old, he looked older than his age. His face was hard, and his eyes held anger that seemed to burn all the time. Next to him sat his mother, Helen Morrison. She was 68 years old, with gray hair and gentle eyes that often looked confused now. Her hands shook slightly as she held her small purse in her lap. Helen suffered from neural degradation, a sickness that made old people forget things. It was common in their polluted world, where the air was thick with chemicals, and the water tasted of metal. "Where are we going again, dear?" Helen asked for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Her voice was soft and uncertain. Jake's jaw tightened. "I already told you, Mom. We're going to the clinic. Your doctor appointment, remember?" Helen nodded but looked more confused. She stared out the window at the passing tunnel lights. "Oh yes, the doctor. Why am I seeing the doctor again?" A passenger sitting across from them, a woman with purple alien skin, looked over with concern. She had seen this before. Many elderly humans had the same problem. It was sad to watch. "Your memory pills, Mom," Jake said through gritted teeth. "You need new memory pills because the old ones don't work anymore." Helen touched her temple gently. "My memory isn't very good these days, is it?" "No, it's not," Jake snapped. Several passengers turned to look at him. His voice was getting louder. "And it's getting worse every day." In the back of the pod, a quiet man watched the scene unfold. He appeared to be in his 60s, with dark hair touched by gray and kind eyes that had seen much of the world. He wore simple work clothes like many others on the pod, and nothing about him seemed special. His name was Connor Davis, though no one else on the pod knew this yet. Connor had been riding the transit system for months now, going to and from his job at a small repair shop. He kept to himself, read old books, and tried to stay invisible. But he always noticed when people needed help, especially when they couldn't help themselves. Helen looked around the pod with wide eyes. "This place looks different. Are we on the right transport?" "Yes, we're on the right transport," Jake said, his patience running out completely. "We take this same route every week. Every single week, Mom. Why can't you remember anything?" The woman with purple skin shifted uncomfortably in her seat. An android near the door turned its head slightly, as if programmed to watch for signs of trouble. Other passengers began to stare openly now. "I'm sorry, dear," Helen said quietly. "I try to remember, but everything gets mixed up in my head." "Sorry doesn't help me," Jake said, his voice rising. "Sorry doesn't make my life easier. Sorry doesn't pay for your medicine or your care or anything else. I work 12 hours every day and I come home to take care of you, and you can't even remember where we're going." Tears began to form in Helen's eyes. She reached out to touch her son's arm, but he pulled away. "Don't," Jake said coldly. "Just don't touch me right now." Connor felt his hands tighten into fists. He had seen many terrible things in his life, but watching a son hurt his mother like this made his chest burn with anger. Still, he remained seated and watched. "Maybe I should go back home," Helen said, her voice shaking. "I don't want to be trouble." "You are trouble," Jake said loudly. Everyone in the pod could hear him now. "You're nothing but trouble. Every day with you is the same. You ask the same questions, you forget the same things, and I have to explain everything like you're a child." An alien with 4 arms spoke up from across the aisle. "Hey friend, maybe you should speak more quietly." Jake turned his anger toward the alien. "Maybe you should mind your own business. This is between me and my family." "When you shout in public, it becomes everyone's business," the alien replied calmly. "She used to be smart," Jake continued, ignoring the alien and speaking to the whole. "But now, she used to help me with school and work and everything. Now look at her. She can't remember what she had for breakfast. She can't remember my name half the time. She's useless." Helen began to cry quietly. Her shoulders shook, and she covered her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Jake." "Stop saying sorry," Jake yelled. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't give me my life back. I'm stuck taking care of you until you die, and some days I wish that would happen sooner rather than later." The pod fell completely silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed quieter now. Everyone stared at Jake in shock. No one could believe what they had just heard. Connor had heard enough. He stood up slowly, his movements calm and controlled. At first, no one paid attention to him. He looked like just another worker, tired from a long day. But as he walked toward Jake and Helen, something about him made people notice. His steps were confident and his presence filled the space around him. "That's enough," Connor said quietly. His voice was not loud, but everyone in the pod heard every word clearly. Jake looked up at Connor with angry eyes. "Who asked you? This is none of your business, old man." Connor stopped in front of Jake and looked down at him. His face was calm, but his eyes held something that made Jake uncomfortable. "When you hurt someone who can't defend herself, it becomes my business. She's my mother. I can talk to her however I want." "No," Connor said simply. "You can't." The transit pod continued through the tunnels, but time seemed to stop. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Helen looked up at Connor through her tears, and for a moment, her eyes seemed clearer than they had been all day. Connor knelt down next to Helen's seat and spoke gently to her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Helen nodded and wiped her eyes. "I'm fine. My son is just tired from work." Connor looked back at Jake, who suddenly felt very small in his seat. Connor remained kneeling beside Helen's seat, his hand gently resting on the armrest. He did not touch her, but his presence was warm and comforting. Helen stopped crying and looked at him with curious eyes. Something about this stranger made her feel safe. Jake stood up quickly, his face red with anger. "I told you to mind your own business. Get away from my mother." Connor slowly rose to his full height. He was not a large man, but something about the way he moved made Jake take a step back. Connor's voice remained calm and quiet, but every person in the transit pod could hear him clearly. "Sit down," Connor said to Jake. It was not a request. "You can't tell me what to do," Jake replied, but his voice was not as strong as before. The other passengers watched silently. Even the aliens seemed to understand that something important was happening. Connor looked directly into Jake's eyes. "I said sit down." Jake felt his legs move without his permission. He sat down heavily, in his seat, confused by his own actions. There was something about this man that made it impossible to argue with him. "Good," Connor said. He turned back to Helen and smiled gently. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Helen," she replied softly. "Helen Morrison." "That's a beautiful name, Helen. My name is Connor." He paused and looked at the other passengers. "I want to tell you all a story about my mother. Her name was Mary Davis." The transit pod continued moving through the dark tunnels, but everyone inside was completely focused on Connor. Jake wanted to interrupt, but something kept him quiet. "My mother was not much older than Helen when my father died," Connor continued. "It happened during the Martian mining wars 25 years ago. My father was a good man, but he was killed in an accident far from home. My mother was left alone with 3 children to raise." Helen nodded slowly. She seemed to understand the story, even though her memory was failing her. "My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed," Connor said. "She cleaned offices at night, worked in a factory during the day, and took care of other people's children in the evening. She never complained, not once. When I was sick, she stayed up all night to take care of me. When I was scared, she held me until I felt better." An alien woman with blue skin wiped tears from her large eyes. Even the android seemed to be listening more carefully than usual. "I was not always a good son," Connor admitted. "When I was young, I was angry about our life. We were poor, and I was embarrassed by our small apartment and old clothes. Sometimes, I said mean things to my mother. I told her I wished we had more money. I told her I wished my father was still alive instead of her." Jake looked down at his feet. Connor's words made him feel uncomfortable, but he could not stop listening. One day, when I was 16, I said something very cruel to my mother. I told her that she was the reason our family was poor. I told her that she was stupid and worthless. I said I hated her. Helen reached out and touched Connor's hand. That must have hurt her very much. Yes, it did, Connor replied. But do you know what she did after I said those terrible things? Helen shook her head. She made me dinner. She washed my clothes. She helped me with my homework. She never stopped, loving me even when I did not deserve it. The purple-skinned alien woman spoke up. What happened to her? Connor's eyes became sad, but he continued speaking. She died when I was 25. She worked so hard for so many years that her body just wore out. The last thing she said to me was that she was proud of the man I had become. Jake felt something break inside his chest. He looked at his mother, who was listening to Connor's story with complete attention. For a moment, her eyes seemed clear and focused, just like they used to be when he was a child. I spent many years regretting the cruel things I said to her, Connor continued. I wished I could take back every mean word, every angry moment, every time I made her feel small, but I learned something important from my regret. What did you learn? Asked the four-armed alien. I learned that our parents are not perfect, but they love us more than anyone else ever will. They sacrifice everything for us, and they never stop trying to make our lives better. When they get old and sick, when their minds start to fail, that is when they need us the most. Connor turned to look at Jake directly. Your mother changed your diapers when you were a baby. She fed you when you were hungry. She stayed awake when you were sick. She worried about you every day of your life. She loved you before you could even speak. Jake felt tears building in his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. Now she is old and confused, and her mind is not working the way it used to, Connor said. But inside her failing memory, she still loves you more than anything in the world. She still wants to make you happy. She still worries about you every day. Helen looked at her son with loving eyes. Jake is a good boy, she said to Connor. He works so hard to take care of me. I know I'm not easy to live with anymore. Mom, Jake whispered, his voice breaking. Connor knelt down again, this time in front of both Helen and Jake. The day will come when your mother is no longer with you. On that day, you will remember every word you said to her. You will remember every time you were kind, and you will remember every time you were cruel. Which memories do you want to carry with you for the rest of your life? Jake finally let the tears fall. I don't know how to do this anymore. She's not the same person she used to be. I miss my real mom. She is your real mom, Connor said firmly. She is just wearing different clothes now. The clothes of old age and sickness, but underneath she is still the woman who loved you before you were born. The transit pod began to slow down as it approached the next station. Connor stood up and looked around at all the passengers. We all have people who love us, he said to everyone. Parents, children, friends. Love is not always easy. Sometimes it is hard work. Sometimes it is painful. But it is the most important thing we can do with our lives. The pod stopped, and the doors opened. Several passengers got off, but they all looked back at Connor before they left. Jake and Helen remained, in their seats, both of them crying now. Connor sat back down in his original seat as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The transit pod moved quietly through the tunnels for several minutes after Connor finished speaking. Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at his mother. Helen sat peacefully, her hands folded in her lap, watching the tunnel lights flash by the window. Mom, Jake said softly, I'm sorry I yelled at you. Helen turned to look at her son with gentle eyes. It's okay, dear. I know you're tired. No, it's not okay, Jake replied. What I said was wrong. You're not useless. You're not trouble. My mother and I love you. Helen smiled and patted Jake's hand. I love you too, Jake. Even when I can't remember things very well, I always remember that I love you. The four-armed alien across the aisle leaned forward. My grandmother had the same sickness, he said to Jake. Her mind got confused too. I used to get frustrated with her, just like you did with your mother. What did you do? Jake asked. I learned to be patient, the alien replied. I learned that sometimes love means repeating yourself 100 times. It means answering the same questions over and over. It means being kind when you don't feel like being kind. A woman with blue skin and large eyes spoke up from the back of the pod. My father forgot who I was for the last 2 years of his life. Every day I had to introduce myself to him. Every day he looked at me like I was a stranger. But I kept visiting him because I knew that somewhere inside his confused mind, he still loved me. That must have been very hard, Helen said to the blue woman. It was the hardest thing I ever did, the blue woman replied. But it was also the most important thing I ever did. More passengers began sharing their stories. An android in the corner, who usually never spoke, activated his voice. Program. I was programmed to care for elderly humans, he said in a mechanical voice. I have seen many families struggle with these problems. The families that stay together and help each other are always happier than the families that give up. Connor listened to all the stories but remained quiet. He was glad to see the passengers talking to each other, sharing their experiences. The transit pod had become a place of healing instead of anger. Jake looked around at all the different faces, humans, aliens, androids, all talking about love and family and taking care of each other. I never knew so many people had the same problems, he said. Everyone has problems, said the purple-skinned woman. The difference is how we handle them. We can handle them with anger, or we can handle them with love. Helen suddenly looked confused again. Where are we going? She asked Jake. This time Jake did not get angry. He took a deep breath and answered patiently. We're going to see your doctor, Mom. You have an appointment to get new medicine for your memory. Oh, that's right, Helen said, nodding. Will you stay with me during the appointment? Of course I will, Jake replied. I'll always stay with you. The transit pod began to slow down as it approached Helen's stop. Connor stood up to help them gather their things. As he helped Helen with her coat, she looked up at him with suddenly clear eyes. I know who you are, she whispered so quietly that only Connor could hear her. Connor's face showed surprise for just a moment. Do you? Helen nodded slowly. You're Connor Davis. You saved us all during the war. Connor looked around quickly, to make sure no one else had heard. How do you know that name? My husband fought in the Martian mining wars, Helen said, her voice still very quiet. He used to tell me stories about a young officer who became a hero. He said you were the bravest man he ever knew. Connor felt his heart beat faster. He had worked very hard to keep his identity secret. Helen, I need you to keep this between us, okay? Why? Helen asked. Because I'm not that person anymore. I'm just Connor now. I work at a repair shop and ride the transit pod like everyone else. I don't want people to treat me differently. Helen smiled and patted his arm. You're still a hero, Connor. Maybe not the kind of hero who fights wars, but the kind who helps people on transit pods. Jake was gathering his mother's purse and medicine bag. He did not hear their quiet conversation, but he noticed that his mother seemed more alert than she had been all day. Mom, are you feeling better? Jake asked. Yes, dear. I feel much clearer right now. Helen looked at Connor again. Thank you for reminding my son how to love me. Connor felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for reminding me why love matters. The transit pod stopped and the doors opened. Jake carefully helped his mother stand up. Other passengers watched them with kind eyes, happy to see that the angry young man had become a caring son again. As they walked toward the door, Helen turned back to Connor. Will we see you again? Maybe, Connor replied. I ride this pod every day. I hope so, Helen said. Jake needs good examples in his life. Jake looked embarrassed, but grateful. Thank you, he said to Connor. Thank you for helping me remember what's important. Connor nodded. Take care of her. She's precious. After Jake and Helen left the pod, the other passengers continued talking about their families and their experiences. The blue woman moved to Connor's section of the pod. That was a beautiful thing you did. she said to Connor. I just told the truth, Connor replied. Sometimes the truth is the most beautiful thing of all, the woman said. A young human woman named Amy Chen sat in the back of the pod, holding a small tablet computer. She had been watching Connor carefully during the entire incident. Something about him seemed familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen him before. Amy was a college student studying galactic history. She was especially interested in the wars that had shaped the relationships between humans and other species. As she watched Connor return to his seat and pick up his old book, she felt sure she knew him from somewhere. Amy opened her tablet and began searching through her files. She had thousands of photos and articles from her research. She searched for Martian mining wars and human heroes and Connor Davis. After a few minutes of searching, Amy found what she was looking for. Her eyes grew wide as she looked at an old photograph on her tablet screen. The photograph showed a much younger man in a military uniform, but the face was definitely the same as the quiet man sitting a few rows ahead of her. Amy read the caption under the photograph. Admiral Connor Davis, hero of the Centauri campaign, single-handedly prevented alien invasion of Earth 2067. Amy looked up from her tablet and stared at Connor with amazement. The most famous war hero in human history was sitting on a public transit pod, reading a book and helping strangers with their family problems. Amy wondered if she should say something to him. She wondered if she should ask for his autograph or take his picture. But something about the way Connor had asked for privacy with Helen made Amy think that he did not want attention. Instead, Amy decided to watch and learn. She wanted to see what kind of person a real hero was when no one was looking. Amy Chen could not stop staring at her tablet screen. The photograph of young Admiral Connor Davis in his military uniform looked exactly like the man sitting a few rows ahead of her. Her hand shook as she read the old news articles about his heroic actions during the war. Single-handedly saved Earth from alien invasion, she read quietly. Prevented galactic war through diplomatic courage. Most decorated officer in human military history. Disappeared from public life after the war ended. Amy looked up at Connor, who was now reading his book again as if nothing had happened. She could not believe that this quiet, gentle man was the same person who had commanded entire fleets of spaceships and negotiated peace treaties with alien governments. The transit pod continued its journey through the city tunnels. More passengers got on and off at each stop, but Amy remained focused on Connor. She wanted to understand how a famous war hero could be so humble and kind. At the next stop, Amy made a decision. She walked carefully toward Connor's seat, holding her tablet behind her back. She did not want to embarrass him or cause a scene. "Excuse me," Amy said quietly. "May I sit here?" Connor looked up from his book and smiled. "Of course." Amy sat down next to Connor and tried to think of what to say. She was nervous about talking to such an important person, but she was also curious about his story. "That was a wonderful thing you did for that family," Amy said. "Anyone would have done the same thing," Connor replied. "I don't think that's true," Amy said. "Most people would have just watched and done nothing." Connor closed his book and looked at Amy. "What's your name?" "Amy Chen. I'm a student at Neo Angeles University. I study galactic history." Connor's face showed a small smile. "Galactic history? That's interesting. What part of history do you study?" Amy felt her heart beat faster. This was her chance to ask him about his past. "I study the wars that brought humans and aliens together. The Martian mining wars, the Centauri campaign, the peace treaties that followed." Connor's smile faded slightly. "Those were difficult times." "Yes, they were," Amy agreed. "But they were also important times. They showed what humans could do when they worked together." Amy pulled out her tablet and showed Connor the screen. "I've been researching a particular person who played a big role in those events." Connor looked at the tablet screen and saw his own young face staring back at him. He was quiet for a long moment. "I see," Connor said finally. "You're him, aren't you?" Amy asked gently. "You're Connor Davis." Connor looked around the transit pod to make sure no one else was listening. Most of the other passengers had gotten off, and the few who remained were busy with their own conversations. "Yes," Connor said quietly. "I am." Amy felt excited and honored to be talking to such a famous person. "I've read everything about what you did during the war. You saved millions of lives. You're a hero to humans and aliens all across the galaxy." Connor shook his head. "I did what needed to be done, nothing more." "But why are you here?" Amy asked. "Why are you riding public transit and working at a repair shop? You could be living in a palace somewhere, giving speeches, being honored by governments." Connor was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "Do you know what the most important part of being a hero is, Amy?" Amy shook her head. "Knowing when to stop being a hero," Connor said. "Knowing when to become a regular person again." "I don't understand," Amy said. Connor looked out the window at the tunnel walls rushing by. "During the war, I had to make very difficult decisions. I had to send people into dangerous situations. Some of them died because of orders I gave. I saved many lives, but I lost some too." Amy nodded, understanding that war was always complicated. "After the war ended, everyone wanted me to keep being a hero." Connor continued. "They wanted me to make speeches, run for political office, lead more military campaigns. But I was tired of making decisions that affected millions of people. I wanted to help people one at a time in small ways." "Like helping Jake and his mother today?" Amy asked. "Exactly," Connor said. "I can't save the galaxy anymore, but I can help one family on a transit pod. I can fix broken machines at my repair shop. I can be kind to strangers, those things matter too." Amy thought about this for a while. "Do you miss your old life?" "Sometimes," Connor admitted. "But I'm happier now. I sleep better at night. I don't have to worry about making decisions that could start wars or end them." Amy looked at her tablet again. "Would it be okay if I wrote about meeting you? Not for news or publicity, but for my school research?" Connor thought carefully about this question. "What would you write?" "I would write about how real heroes are not just the people who fight in wars," Amy said. "I would write about how heroes can be people who help others in everyday life. I would write about kindness being just as important as courage." Connor smiled. "I would like that. But please don't mention where I work or where I live. I want to keep my privacy." "I promise," Amy said. Amy spent the rest of the transit ride talking with Connor about history, about war and peace, and about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of different species. Connor told her stories about the aliens he had met during his military service, and how he had learned that most beings in the universe wanted the same things: safety, family, and happiness. When Amy's stop arrived, she stood up to leave. "Thank you for talking with me," she said. "This has been the most important conversation of my life." "Thank you for listening," Connor replied. "And Amy?" "Yes? Remember that the best stories are not always about the biggest heroes. Sometimes they're about ordinary people doing extraordinary things." After Amy left the pod, she walked home thinking about everything Connor had told her. That night, she sat at her computer and began writing about her experience. She wrote about Jake and Helen, about Connor's kindness, and about how small acts of love could change the world. Amy posted her story on the university's student blog. She expected maybe a few classmates would read it. She never expected what happened next. Within hours, Amy's story was shared thousands of times across the galactic internet. People from Earth to the outer colonies read about the famous war hero who had given up fame to help ordinary people. The story spread to alien worlds, where beings who had heard of Connor Davis during the war learned about his new life of quiet service. News organizations across human space picked up the story. "War hero found living simple life," read one headline. "Connor Davis, from admiral to everyday hero," read another. Jake Morrison saw the story while browsing the internet at work the next day. He could not believe that the kind man who had helped him and his mother was one of the most famous people in human history. Jake felt even more ashamed of his behavior on the transit pod. But he also felt grateful that such an important person had taken time to help his family. The story continued to spread, inspiring people everywhere to be kinder to their families and neighbors. Connor's simple act of helping a confused elderly woman and her frustrated son had reminded the galaxy what it meant to be human. Connor woke up the next morning to find reporters standing outside his small apartment building. News trucks lined the street, and camera crews waited near the entrance to his workplace. His quiet life had ended overnight. Connor looked out his window and sighed. He had known this day would come eventually. Someone would recognize him, and his secret would be revealed to the world. He just had not expected it to happen because he helped an old woman on a transit pod. His communication device buzzed constantly with calls from news reporters, government officials, and old friends from his military days. Connor turned off the device and sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee and thinking about what to do next. At the same time, across the city, Jake Morrison was having the worst day of his life. After reading Amy's story about meeting Connor Davis, Jake realized that he had insulted his mother in front of the most famous hero in human history. The shame was almost too much to bear. But Jake's shame turned to panic when he received a call from the hospital. His mother Helen had been brought in during the night. The stress from their argument on the transit pod had made her condition worse. She was confused and frightened, and the doctor said her memory problems were getting more severe. Jake rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding with fear and guilt. When he arrived, he found Helen lying in a white hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen her. Her eyes were closed and machines monitored her breathing and heartbeat. "Mom?" Jake said softly, taking her hand. Helen opened her eyes and looked at Jake without recognition. "Who are you?" she asked. Jake felt his heart break. "I'm Jake. I'm your son." Helen looked confused and a little scared. "I don't remember having a son. Are you sure you have the right person?" The doctor, a kind woman named Lisa Park, pulled Jake aside. "The stress from yesterday caused her condition to worsen rapidly. She may not remember you for a while, or possibly ever again." "I'm sorry." Jake sat beside his mother's bed and cried. He had spent so much time being angry about her failing memory that he had never considered how frightening it must be for her. Now she looked at him like he was a stranger, and it was his fault. Meanwhile, Connor was trying to leave his apartment without being seen by the reporters. He used the building's back exit and took side streets to avoid the news crews. He had only one destination in mind, the hospital where Helen was staying. Connor had learned about Helen's condition from a news report that morning. The reporters had tracked down Jake's family and were trying to interview him about meeting the famous war hero. When Jake refused to speak to them, they reported that his elderly mother had been hospitalized. Connor felt responsible for Helen's condition getting worse. If he had not intervened on the transit pod, if Amy had not written her story, if the news had not spread across the galaxy, maybe Helen would still be at home instead of lying in a hospital bed. When Connor arrived at the hospital, he was surprised to find that the reporters had not followed him there. He went to the information desk and asked about Helen Morrison. "Are you family?" the nurse asked. "I'm a friend," Connor replied. The nurse gave him Helen's room number, and Connor took the elevator to the 3rd floor. When he found the room, he saw Jake sitting beside his mother's bed, holding her hand and talking to her quietly. Connor knocked gently on the doorframe. Jake looked up and saw him standing there. "Connor," Jake said, his voice full of emotion. "You came." "How is she?" Connor asked, stepping into the room. "She doesn't remember me," Jake said, tears in his eyes. "The doctor says the stress from yesterday made everything worse. She looks at me like I'm a stranger." Connor felt a heavy weight in his chest. "I'm sorry, Jake. This is my fault." "No," Jake said firmly. "This is my fault. I caused the stress. I hurt her with my words and my anger. You tried to help us." Connor sat down in the chair on the other side of Helen's bed. Helen looked at him with curious eyes. "Hello," she said to Connor. "Do I know you?" "We met yesterday," Connor said gently. My name is Connor. Connor, Helen repeated. That's a nice name. You have kind eyes. Thank you, Connor said. You have kind eyes too. For the next hour, Connor sat with Jake and Helen. He did not try to make Helen remember him or Jake. Instead, he talked to her about simple things. The weather, the flowers in the hospital garden, the soft music playing in the hallway. Helen seemed calm and peaceful when Connor talked to her. She smiled and nodded, even though she did not remember who he was. Jake watched in amazement as Connor showed infinite patience with his mother's condition. How do you do it? Jake asked Connor quietly. How do you stay so calm when she doesn't remember anything? I learned something important during the war, Connor replied. I learned that love is not about being remembered. Love is about loving, even when the person cannot love you back in the same way. Jake thought about these words. But it hurts when she doesn't know who I am. Of course it hurts, Connor said. But the hurt means you love her. The hurt means you care. Do not try to make the hurt go away. Let it remind you why she matters. As the afternoon passed, more visitors arrived at the hospital. The blue-skinned alien woman from the transit pod came with flowers. The four-armed alien brought a small gift. Even some of the androids from the transit pod visited, bringing cards and well wishes. How did they know Helen was here? Jake asked. Amy's story made your mother famous too, Connor explained. People across the galaxy read about her and were touched by her story. They want to show that they care. Dr. Park came into the room to check on Helen. She was surprised to see so many visitors from different species. I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Park said to Connor. People from all over the city have been calling to ask about Helen's condition. Some aliens I've never even seen before have sent flowers and gifts. She touched many hearts, Connor said. That evening, as visiting hours ended, Connor prepared to leave. Jake stood up to shake his hand. Will you come back tomorrow? Jake asked. If you want me to, Connor replied. I do, Jake said. I think my mother likes you, even if she doesn't remember you. Connor smiled. I like her too. She reminds me of my own mother. As Connor left the hospital, he found Amy Chen waiting outside. She looked worried and guilty. I'm sorry, Amy said immediately. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant for Helen to get worse or for you to lose your privacy. Connor stopped and looked at Amy with kind eyes. Amy, do you know what I learned in the hospital today? Amy shook her head. I learned that love is stronger than memory. I learned that kindness can travel across the galaxy. I learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought in hospital rooms, not on distant planets. Are you angry at me? Amy asked. No, Connor said. You told a story about love and family. That story has made people think about their own families. That story has brought aliens and humans together in ways that peace treaties never could. You did something beautiful, Amy. Amy felt relief wash over her. What will you do now? Will you go back to your old life? Connor looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. I don't know yet, but whatever I do, I will keep helping people, one person at a time. That's who I am now. 2 weeks later, Helen Morrison passed away peacefully in her sleep. Jake held her hand as she took her last breath. In her final moments, she looked at Jake with clear eyes and whispered, I love you, my son. These were the last words she spoke. Connor was at the hospital when it happened. He had visited Helen every day since she was admitted, sometimes sitting quietly while she slept, sometimes reading to her from old books. He never expected her to remember him, but he wanted her to know that someone cared about her. When Helen died, Jake felt lost and broken. The guilt of their last argument still weighed heavily on his heart. Connor put his arm around Jake's shoulders and held him while he cried. She knew you loved her, Connor said softly. At the end, she remembered. She called you her son. But I was so cruel to her, Jake sobbed. I said terrible things. I told her I wished she would die. And then you changed, Connor replied. You spent these last 2 weeks showing her love and kindness. You read to her, you brought her flowers, you held her hand. She will remember the love, not the anger. Jake looked at Connor through his tears. How do you know that? Because that's what love does, Connor said. Love forgives. Love heals. Love lasts longer than memory. The funeral was held 3 days later in a small chapel in the old part of Neo Angeles. Jake expected only a few people to attend, but when he arrived at the chapel he found hundreds of beings waiting outside. Humans, aliens of every species, and even some androids had come to pay their respects to Helen Morrison. Amy Chen was there with flowers from her university. The blue-skinned woman from the transit pod brought her entire family. The four-armed alien had traveled from another city to attend. News reporters stood respectfully at the back, but they did not try to interview anyone. Jake was amazed by the crowd. I don't understand, he said to Connor. Why are all these people here? They didn't even know my mother. They know her story, Connor replied. They know that she was a mother who loved her son, even when he forgot how to love her back. They know that she represented every parent who has ever sacrificed for their children. Connor had agreed to speak at the funeral. As he stood at the front of the chapel looking out at the diverse crowd of mourners, he felt the weight of his words. Helen Morrison was not a famous person, Connor began. She did not lead armies or negotiate peace treaties. She did not explore distant planets or make scientific discoveries. She was simply a mother who loved her son. The crowd listened in complete silence. But Helen taught us something more important than any discovery or victory, Connor continued. She taught us that love does not require perfection. She taught us that forgiveness is stronger than memory. She taught us that the most important battles are not fought with weapons, but with patience and kindness. Connor looked directly at Jake. Helen's son Jake learned these lessons in the hardest way possible. He learned them by almost losing the most important person in his life, but he learned them in time to show his mother how much he loved her. After the funeral, people from many different worlds approached Jake to share their own stories about difficult relationships with their parents. An alien diplomat told Jake about reconciling with his father after years of anger. A human soldier talked about learning to care for her mother's failing memory. An android shared how studying human families had taught him about love. Jake realized that his story with his mother was not unique. Families everywhere struggled with the same problems, felt the same guilt, and needed the same forgiveness. 1 month after Helen's funeral, Jake made an important decision. He used his savings to start a foundation called Helen's House, a place where families could get help caring for elderly relatives with memory problems. Connor helped Jake plan the foundation and find a building in the center of the city. The foundation offered support groups where people could share their experiences and learn from each other. It provided training for family members who were caring for confused relatives. It created a safe place where elderly people with memory problems could spend time with others who understood their condition. Amy Chen wrote another article about Jake's foundation. This story also spread across the galaxy, inspiring similar organizations on dozens of other worlds. The simple act of kindness on a transit pod had grown into a movement that helped millions of families. Connor quietly returned to his job at the repair shop. But his life was different now. People recognized him on the street and thanked him for his service during the war. More importantly, they thanked him for showing them how to be better to their families. Connor did not mind the attention as much as he had expected. He realized that his story could help people understand that heroes were not just the people who fought wars. Heroes were also the people who chose kindness when anger was easier, who chose patience when frustration was natural, who chose love when memory failed. 6 months after Helen's death, Connor was riding the same transit pod where everything had started. The pod was crowded with the usual mix of humans, aliens, and androids returning home from work. Connor watched as a young alien woman struggled to help her elderly father, who seemed confused and frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings. The old alien kept asking where they were going, and his daughter patiently answered the same question over and over. Connor smiled as he watched other passengers offer help to the struggling family. The blue-skinned woman gave up her seat for the elderly alien. The four-armed passenger offered to carry their bags. A human teenager helped translate when the old alien forgot how to speak standard galactic language. Connor realized that something fundamental had changed. The story of Jake and Helen had taught people across the galaxy that helping others was not just a human trait. It was something that all intelligent beings could choose to do. As the transit pod reached Connor's stop, he stood to leave. The young alien woman looked at him and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Connor asked. "For showing us all how to be better," she replied. Connor stepped off the transit pod and walked home through the busy streets of Neo Angeles. Above him, alien ships moved peacefully through the sky alongside human vessels. Around him, different species worked together, lived together, and helped each other in ways that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Connor understood now that his greatest victory had not been won on a distant battlefield. It had been won on a simple transit pod, where he had chosen to help one family remember how to love each other. That choice had reminded an entire galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized. Years later, when historians studied the period known as the Great Peace, they would point to many treaties and agreements that brought different species together. But they would always begin their stories with a simple transit pod, an elderly woman with a failing memory, and a son who learned to love her again. Some acts of kindness echo across the stars forever.